So now we'll come back to part 2 here of the video. So we'll just kind of continue with the examples. Let's take a look at number 4. Here's the picture. They don't label it for us, so we're going to put the numbers in. TA, that length is 8. AM is 4. That's the outside part. MS is 8. That's the whole thing for the bottom secant. Find MH. So what we're looking for is this piece, that part here. That is the outside part. That's my X. I'm going to call that X. So here's outside part for the top secant is 4. The whole secant is 4 plus 8, which is 12. In the bottom secant, the outside part is X. Okay, here's the whole. And the whole thing, they already told us, is 8. We don't need to add. They already tell us the whole thing, MS. That length is 8. All right, so here we go. The formula is, I'll start with the bottom one because that has the variable. Outside part times the whole secant, which is 8, equals outside part, 4, times the whole secant, which is 12. So we have 8x equals 48, divide by 8, x is 6. Now before we stop here, it says find MH. MH is, that's x, x is 6, so the length of MH is 6. And that's it. All right, let's take number 5, find x. All right, now we have a tangent. Because this only touches the circle in one place. So we have one tangent and then we have a secant. Now before you start thinking, this just got more confusing, actually it didn't. It's the same formula. It's the outside part times the whole. But for the tangent, the outside part is x, but so is the whole thing. It's the same value, it's the same number. So what happens is when we do outside part times the whole, we do x times x equals, the outside part is 2, and then the whole secant is we add these, 2 plus 6 is 8. X times x is x squared equals 16. To undo a square, we take the square root of both sides. X equals 4 or negative 4. We actually get 2 answers when you solve it algebraically. But in this case, because x represents a length, we only have one answer. It's just positive 4. That's it. Okay, so if you get a tangent, nothing changes with the process. Outside part times the whole equals outside part times the whole. It's just these are the same. And you can do that for number 6. You can say the outside part times the whole, x times x, equals another tangent, outside part times the whole. But actually, before we do that, let's make this even simpler. We've already talked about this. When you have 2 tangents from the same external point, they have to be congruent. So you don't even need to do a formula. You can immediately say x equals 15, and you're done. So you want to look for those things. You want to look for relationships, look for shortcuts, because they can really help you out. So we'll do one more example here. We'll take number 7, which again it says find x. All right, so we have secant, secant. For the top secant, the outside part is x. Now the whole thing is x plus 8. And then in the bottom secant, the outside part is 3. And the whole thing is 3 plus 13, which is 16. All right, I'm going to do this over here on the side. Now, when we do the outside part x times the whole thing, so I'm going to put parentheses to multiply this, we have a second x value that's here. So that's going to change how we solve it a little bit. Equals outside part 3 times the whole thing, which is 16. When you multiply here, when we distribute, x times x is x squared plus, that's 8x equals 3 times 16 is 48. Now this is a quadratic equation because we have the x squared term. So to solve this, there are a couple ways to go. I'm going to try to factor it, which means I need to move the constant 48 to the same side with the other terms. So what I need to do is set my equation equal to 0. X squared plus 8x minus 48. We can't subtract those because they're not like terms, equals 0. Now, to factor, can we think of two numbers that multiply to negative 48 that add up to positive 8? And if you go through the factors of 48, you're going to eventually get to, well, let's see, we got 1 and 48, 2 and 24, 3 and 16. Now, one of them would have to be positive and one would have to be negative because it has to add up to negative 48. How about 4 and 12? If we do negative 4 plus 12, that multiplies to negative 48, and then it adds up to positive 8. So that's our winning combination here. So the two factors, I can immediately go from here and say that's x minus 4, one factor, times x plus 12 is the other factor, is equal to 0. When we have two numbers multiplying to get 0, either the first number, the first factor is 0, or the second factor is 0. And now we can solve these. So x equals positive 4, or x is equal to negative 12. Now again, you have to think in terms of a geometry problem. X represents a length. A length cannot have a negative distance, a negative value. Okay, so I'm going to cross that one out. So we have one answer, x is equal to 4. If you don't like to factor, you can use the quadratic formula, which is longer, but will also get you the answer, x equals opposite b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, so we can do that. Now I'm going to take, here's my equation. A is 1, b is 8, c is negative 48, and then I'm going to substitute those values. X equals the opposite of 8 plus or minus the square root b squared, that's 8 squared minus 4, times a, which is 1, times c, which is negative 48, all divided by the whole thing divided by 2 times a. All right, now we got to keep working here. X equals the opposite of 8 plus or minus the square root, big square root. 8 squared is 64. Negative 4 times 1 times negative 48 is plus 192. Negative times a negative is a positive, all divided by 2. Okay, I'm going to come up here. So we get x equals negative 8 plus or minus square root. Now I can add these. They're under the same square root. We get 256 divided by 2. Now what's really nice is that 256 is perfect. The square root of that is 16 divided by 2. Now what happens here, we've got two answers. We've got negative 8 plus 16 divided by 2, and then we've got negative 8 minus 16 divided by 2. That's what plus or minus means. So we're going to simplify each one individually. Negative 8 plus 16 gives us positive 8 over 2, which is 4. There's one answer. Negative 8 minus 16 is negative 24 divided by 2, which is negative 12. So again, we get the same two answers. Negative 12 doesn't make sense because it's a distance. X is a distance, and the answer is x equals 4, and that is the end of the notes.